Yeah.
So we'll see. Okay. All right. I'm going to get started with us, the sponsors, and then today's Gemara, not necessarily difficult, a little on the long side, but a fair bit of Agadata. So that's why. Okay. Okay, our sponsors, Dr. Paul Koningsberg, in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Reuven ben Labish, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nissen Hara Nissen ben Fardosa. Paula and Bob Bromberg, in memory of their dear friend Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malcolm Mann, in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Arav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Paris, Saratova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gitler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, Cheryl Sher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva, Marcia Fetterbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Oriel Paul Fetterbush, Oriel ben Harav Shimon. A Month of Learning by Haran and Mal Haller, in memory of her mother, Malka Rachel bat Yehuda Leib, Adina and Michael Kirshner, in memory of their parents, Florence and Nathan Kirshner, and friend Harriet Friedman. Tova and Leo Zimmer, in memory of her mother, Henya bas Rav Beryl, and her father, Aaron ben Yosef Mordechai. Perry and Jill Meltzer, in memory of his mother, Malka bas Baruch, and sister Goldalea bat David Halevi. Carol and Josh Sanborn, in memory of her father, Yehoshua Shia ben Moshe Yehuda HaKohen, and Stanley Presser, in memory of his mother, Leah bat Yehuda, his mother-in-law, Golda bas Avram, and his wife, Ruchel Mincha bas Moshe. Have a Week of Learning by Judy Iger, in memory of her mother, Bela bas Anshel Yitzchak, by Sherry and Moshe Gross, in memory of her mother, Miriam bas Meir, and today being the 26th is a day of learning sponsored by Bob and Paula Bromberg, in memory of his uncle, Beryl ben Nassan Yitzchak Isaac Halevi. May the Shemas have an Aliyah, Kranker Afia, Velti Yashir, Shem Atliya, and L'chol B'nai Yisrael, a good gebenched Yar.
Amen.
Okay. We stopped on the top of Samach Vav Amud Aleph because I suggested that the latter part of the Mishnah, okay, lead us into the Gemara, okay? And basically, just as a quick review, we saw that the Mishnah is dealing with a situation where the 14th of Nisan comes out on Shabbos. And therefore, as a result, what acts are permitted to be done regarding the Korban Pesach and which are not. Okay? The Reisha of the Mishnah said, Shchita, Zrika, okay? Also the cleaning of the intestines and the burning of the fat, okay, all that could be done, but not the roasting and certain other things, okay? And the Mishnah went on, excuse me, to discuss whether something is considered d'oraita or d'Rabbanan. So when we go now, picking up then on the bottom of Samach Hey Amud Beis, okay, towards the end, that part of the Mishnah, we saw a machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabbi Akiva then joined in to defend Rabbi Yehoshua. Okay, that's where we were sort of holding when we finished. Okay, so to pick up then Samech Vav, Amud Aleph, the top, Amalo Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, basically, Rabbi Eliezer, you gave us an argument, okay? But I'm going to flip your argument and present it the following way, which will challenge you. Okay? Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, saying to Rabbi Eliezer, right? O chiluf, so change it over, flip it over. And what happens if we look at it from the following perspective? Ma im haza'ah shehi mishum shvut, whereas the sprinkling, since it's going to say for a moment only a rabbinic prohibition, right? And remember, we said rabbinic prohibitions, shvut, is not enacted in the azara, in the temple precinct. Eina dochet haShabbat. Nevertheless, it doesn't put off the Shabbat. Shchita, which we said was a Torah prohibition, shehi mishum melacha, because it is considered a kind of work. Eino din shelo tidchet haShabbat. Isn't it not reasonable that we say that this will therefore put off the Shabbat? Now, Rabbi Eliezer tries to answer. Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer, he says, Akiva, okay? Ikarta masha katuv b'Torah. Okay, by giving that kind of an argument, he says you've uprooted the basic idea of what a malacha is, and that the prohibition of malacha on Shabbos. But more than that, he says, we have a pasuk. It says basically, b'moado, that according to the pasuk, the Korban Pesach must be offered in its appropriate time. Remember, we saw that in the discussion of Lishma, right? That's the key. Bein b'chol, bein b'Shabbat, regardless if it's on weekday, regardless if it's on Shabbos. Amarlo. So now Rabbi Akiva responds, okay, with the following. Rebbe, talking to Rabbi Eliezer, Haba v'lei moed le'elu k'moed l'shchita. Okay. All right. So in other words, he's saying to him, can you say that this phrase of moed is unique? I'm going to explain it this way. To Pesach? Not necessarily the case. Okay. All offerings basically need really to be done at their appropriate time. Okay? Avele moed, bring me this example of moed. La'elu, to these others, in other words, other kinds of offerings, kimoed l'shchita, they also need to be done, slaughtered at their appropriate time. Klal amar Rabbi Akiva. And this seems to imply there's a general principle here. Kol melacha she'afshar la'asota me'erev Shabbat, any kind of melacha, particularly aspects of the avoda, okay? And we're talking about Korban Pesach, therefore, as well, that can be done prior to the arrival of Shabbat. Eina dochet Shabbat. It does not put off Shabbat. Shchita. She'i efshar la'asota me'erev Shabbat, since the slaughtering of the animal cannot be done before Shabbos, right? Doche et haShabbat, that must therefore put off the Shabbos. Okay. Now we're going to see as we go into the Gemara that really the Korban Pesach isn't the only case of this example. What can we think of would be the best example to show that the Korban has to be slaughtered at its appropriate time, even on Shabbat? Korban Tamid.
The Tamid.
Yeah, all right. The Tamid is done every day, twice a day, regardless if it's Shabbat or Yom Tov or a weekday.
Right.
Okay? So we may get to that. Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, says a Braita. Okay, as follows. Halacha zo nit alma mibnei batera. Okay, here, as I said, we're getting into a Braita, which is a long piece of Agadata. This law, what law? In other words, what do you do about, is that the question of slaughtering on Shabbat, the Korban Pesach? Is that the law that they forgot? Or is there something more detailed than that? But the Braita is telling us that Bnei Batera, who were one of the leading families halachically at the time, Pam echat chal arba'a asar liyot b'Shabbat. An occasion occurred that the 14th of Nisan fell out on Shabbos. Shachachu v'lo yadu im Pesach dochet Shabbat im lam. And they did not know, they forgot, and did not remember, I'll say, whether the offering of preparation of the Korban Pesach put off Shabbat or not. Amru, they said, Klum yesh adam sheyodea im Pesach dochet Shabbat im lav. Is there no one who knows whether the offering of Korban Pesach puts off Shabbat or not? Amru lahem, they told him, Adam echad yesh she'ala miklal mibavel. A certain man who made Aliyah come up from Babylonia, v'Hillel habavli shmo, and Hillel the Babylonian, this is Hillel the elder, okay, is his name. Sheshimesh shnei gdolei hador shmaya va'avtalyon. And he served, in other words, either we could say he learned from Shmaya v'Avtalyon, that zug, or he actually was their shamash as well. Okay, v'yodea im Pesach dochet Shabbat im lav, and he knows whether or not the Korban Pesach preparation puts off Shabbat or not. Shalchu, they sent for him. V'karulo, and they called him. Amrulo, and they said to him, Kluma tayodea im Pesach dochet Shabbat im lav. Is there anything you know about whether the Korban Pesach preparations defer Shabbat or not? Amar lahem, he said to them, V'chi Pesach echad yesh lanu b'shana shedochet Shabbat. I'm going to phrase it. Is the Korban Pesach the only offering such that we know that it takes precedence or takes over, defers Shabbat? V'halo harbe yoter mimatayim psachim yesh lanu b'shana shedochin et haShabbat. Aren't there more than 200 examples, I'm going to say, of offerings like the Korban Pesach, okay, that put off Shabbat, that defer Shabbat? By the way, the Koran mentions here that there are like 2 or 3 different languages in the Yerushalmi and the Tosefta to this answer. Some say 100, some say 200, some say 300.
Wow.
In other words, aren't there multiple examples of offerings brought on Shabbat? Amrulo, they said to him, Minayin lach, on what basis do you know this? Amar lehem ne'amar, it says, Mo'ado b'Pesach. It says at its appointed time regarding the Korban Pesach. V'ne'ma amar Mo'ado b'Tamid. And it also says at its appointed time for the Tamid. Ma Mo'ado ha'amur b'Tamid dochet Shabbat. The same way at its appointed time mentioned by the Tamid defers Shabbat. Af moado ha'amor b'Pesach dochet haShabbat. So likewise, at its appointed time, referring Pesach, the first Shabbat. Va'od, and furthermore, he said, Kal v'chomehu. There's also a fortiori argument, the Kal v'chomer argument. Umat tamid she'ein anush karet, whereas tamid, okay, if one does not bring it in its appropriate method, let's say, the punishment, okay, is not considered to be karet, dochet haShabbat, nevertheless, it does defer Shabbat. Pesach, she'anush karet, Korban Pesach, where its punishment is more severe, okay, if it's not done appropriately, resulting in karet, eino din shedochet haShabbat. Is it not reasonable, therefore, that its proper procedure defers Shabbat? Now, what happens, says the Braita? Miyad hoshivuhu berosh uminuhu nasi alehem. Immediately then, they established him as the head, okay? In other words, as the head of the community, perhaps the nasi, right? And therefore made him as clearly nasi alehem. Okay? Now, v'haya doresh kol hayom kulo behilchot haPesach. And he continued the rest of the day to expound on the laws of Pesach. However, the Gemara also tells us the following. Hitchil mikan taran. He began to rebuke b'dvarim. He began to rebuke them orally, right, with words. Amar lahem, and he said to them, Mi garam lachem she'ela mi Bavel v'heya nasi alechem. What was the cause that I should come from Babylonia and become the nasi over you? Atzelut. It's the laziness. Sha'ita bachem shalosh shimashtem shnei gedolei hador shmaya va'avtalyon. That you did not serve and learn from the two, the gedolei hador, the two masters of the generation, will say shmaya va'avtalyon. Remember, they were the next to the last of the Zugot. Right. Now, Amrulo, they said to him, Rebbe, it said, Shachach v'lo hevi sakin me'erev Shabbat mahu. Sorry. So they now ask him a new question. If one, again, this is still part of the same long Braita. What happens if someone forgot to bring the knife for the shechita of these animals and it's Shabbat? Are they defiling the Shabbat or not? That's the implication. Amar lahem, he said to them, Halacha zo shamati v'shachachti. I learned this law, but I forgot it. So even Hillel was human, right? Ela hanach lehen liYisrael. But leave it up to the Jewish people. Im ein nevi'im hein. Sorry, b'nei nevi'im hein. If they are not clearly prophets, they are the sons, the children of prophets. Lemachar, the next day, mi shepischau taleh, one who had for his korban pesach a tleh, a young lamb, tochvo b'tzmaro, he stuck it inside the wool. Mi shepischau gedi, one who had a young goat for his korban pesach, tochvo bein karnav, he arranged it between the horns of the animal. Ra'a ma'aseh v'niskar halacha, he saw this act and he remembered the law. Va'amar, and he said, Kach mekublani mipi shmaya va'avtalyon, such is what I received Shem Shmaya v'Avtalyon. Now, further statement. Amar Mar. Gemara tells us, coming back to something we said earlier. Ne'emar, the Braita said, Ne'emar mo'ado b'Pesach, v'ne'emar mo'ado b'Tamid. It said the appointed time in Pesach, the appointed time regarding Tamid. Ma mo'ado ha'amor b'Tamid dochet Shabbat, af mo'ado ha'amor b'Pesach dochet Shabbat. Same way appointed time defers for Tamid, so it also should defer for a Pesach, for Shabbos, for the Pesach as well. The Tamid, so the Gemara asks, right? The Tamid, gufei minalan dedache Shabbat. And regarding the Tamid itself, how do we know that it defers Shabbat? Right? Ilema, if we say mishum dichtiv bei b'moado, if we say simply, I'm saying because it's written there at its appointed time, Pesach nami, Pesach also, hakativ bei moado. Here also it's written moado, it's appointed time. Ela moado lo mashmale. But from the phrase moado, it's not how we learn it. Hachanami moado lo mashmale. Here also, from the time of moado, its appointed time, we don't learn it. Okay? Ela amar kra. But rather we can learn it as a better source from a pasuk, right? Namely, the pasuk says, Olat Shabbat v'Shabbato al Olat HaTalmid. Okay? That the Ola of Shabbat must be done on Shabbat, and the Ola of Tamid, implying that there's some connection between the Tamid and the Ola. Miklal, therefore we generalize and say as follows, Ola Tamid, Kreva b'Shabbat. The Ola, okay, like a Tamid, is to be offered on Shabbat. However, the Gemara goes back and says, Amar Mar. But we have another statement where he said as follows, Va'od kal v'chomer, that there was also this kal v'chomer, Umat Tamid she'ein anush karet, dochet HaShabbat, whereas the Tamid's not punishable by kares, it defers Shabbat. Pesach she'anush kares, that the Pesach offering, when not done properly, we said, punishable by kares. Eino din shedochet HaShabbat. Isn't it logical that it also exempts, defers Shabbat? Ikala mifrach. But that kal v'chomer, it's possible to challenge, namely by the following. Ma'le tamid shekein tadir v'kalil, whereas the tamid, okay, which we say is more frequent, and also, okay, we also say that it is kalil, it's to be consumed, okay, as well, right? Kal v'chomer, how much more so? Amar laho bereisha uparchuha. So how much more so could we say that the Tamid therefore is different than the Pesach, and therefore you can't make the kal v'chomer from it, and thus we see they are able to challenge it. Okay, v'hada amar laho gzeira shava. He then came back, Hillel, and based it on a gzeira shava. Now, what is the difference in terms of the homiletical principles? Basically, we should remember that a kal v'chomer, anyone can judge, can bring it on their own. But a gzeira shava, there has to be a masorah connected to it. And that's the basis, that it has to have been based on something one learned from a previous teacher. So the Gemara tells us, "V'chime achar de Gemar gzeira shava kal v'chomer lamali." Since he learned it on the basis of a gzeira shava, okay, which is a stronger exegetical principle. Why the need for the kal v'chomer? Ela l'didho ka'amar laho. But rather, okay, for himself, he said it. Okay? Bishle megzera shava lo gamritu. In other words, this is what he was basically saying to them. This gezerah shava, you did not learn, so therefore you couldn't make it. Eina dam dan gezerah shava ma'atzma. Because a person cannot produce, let's say, expound the gezerah shava on his own. Ele kal v'chomer, but a kal v'chomer, da adam dan ma'atzmo, that a person is able to bring on their own. Okay, ibai l'chu l'madin. Okay, that it was necessary that you could have learned that. Amrule, they said to him, kal v'chomer pricha. But a kal v'chomer we can challenge, right? Prichahu. But a kal v'chomer has a challenge. That's why they said we did not learn the kal v'chomer on our own. Now, Gemara is going to bring us another piece we saw earlier. Amar mar, said the master, lemachar misha paschot le tuchav lo b'samaro. That the next day, one whose korban pesach was a lamb, right? He stuck it in the wool. Gedi tochav lo bein karnav. That if it was a goat, he stuck it between its horns. Okay? And we go on the top of Samech Vav Amud Beis. Vaha ka'avid avoda b'kadoshim. But there's a problem if you say that, because isn't this an example of carrying out a work, an active work, using consecrated animals? And that's forbidden. Kehillel, as we say that Hillel taught to Tanya, Amru alav al Hillel, miyamav lo ma'al adam ba'olato. Okay, that it said from the time of Hillel, he had a principle, or people used to say, that from that time no one ever committed an act of me'ilah, of let's say, appropriation of a consecrated item regarding his offering. Ela mevi'ah chulim la'azara. But they would bring the animal as a secular, deconsecrated item to the temple precinct. Umakdisha, okay, and consecrated. V'somech yado aleha v'shochta. And then he would put his hands on it and slaughter it. So Gemara here is going to challenge this explanation. Pesach b'Shabbat, hechi matzeh makdish le. Bringing the korban Pesach on Shabbos, how is it possible to consecrate it? V'hatanan, because aren't we taught elsewhere in another Mishnah, ein mikdishin, we do not consecrate, ve'ein ma'arichin, and we don't make erech vows, ve'ein machrimin, and we don't put a cherem, a designation of ritual status, sacred status. Ve'ein magbi'in truma u'ma'asrot, and we don't establish trumot u'ma'asrot. Okay? Kol elu biyom tov omru. All of these were said regarding a yontif. Kal v'chomer b'Shabbat, and how much more so we don't do these things on Shabbos. So the Gemara comes back and says, Ani mili b'chovot. That is in regards to obligatory item offerings. She'ein kavu lehen zman, where one does not have a fixed time associated with them. Aval b'chovot shekavu lehen zman, but obligations, obligated offerings, where there is a fixed time, mikdishin, okay, we do consecrate. Da'amar Rabbi Yochanan, as said by Rabbi Yochanan, makdish adam et pischo b'Shabbat, that an individual can consecrate his Pesach offering on Shabbat, v'chagigato b'yom tov, and his holiday offering on the holiday. But the Gemara says, we've got another problem here. V'halo mechamer. Isn't this a case of our leading or driving a laden animal on Shabbat or Yom Tov, which is forbidden? Mechamer kila'achar yad. So he drove the animal, or he led the animal in a non-usual manner. Mechamer kila'achar yad. You're saying he led the animal or drove the animal that was loaded with a burden, right? The animal was carrying something, doing work. Nami nehi de isura de oraita. Okay. Let us also say that here this is a Torah prohibition, leka, and we don't have it. Isura de midrabanan mihaika. But we do have at least a rabbinical prohibition here. Hainu deka bai mine. And perhaps this is precisely the question that Bnei Betera were trying to get at when they asked him about doing the Korban Pesach on Shabbos. Okay? Debar sheyesh lo heter min haTorah. That's something which seems to have permissibility from the Torah. V'davar shvut, and rabbinic prohibition, omeid lefanav, okay, that the rabbinic prohibition nevertheless, I'm going to say, stands in its way. Like ro kila'achar yad, is it possible to uproot it by means of an unusual manner, b'makom mitzvah, in a situation where we're expected to do a mitzvah? Mai, what's the status? Amar lahem, and this is what he said to them. Halacha zo shamati v'shachachti. This particular kind of law I learned but forgot. Ela hanichu lahem liYisrael, but rather leave it to the practice of the people. Im ein nevi'im hen, b'nei nevi'im hen. Because if they are not themselves prophets, they are the children of prophets. In other words, someone must have made a halacha, and the people normally would follow that practice. And when we see the practice of the people, okay, then we know what is expected. Okay, reminds us of that phrase. The Gemara says, "Puk chaze amech." Okay, go and look and see what the people do perform. Okay, now Gemara is going to bring us a slightly new topic. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Okay, says in the name of Rav. Okay, now this new topic is a digression, but we're going to see it's going to lead back to the Braita about Hillel. Okay, the following: Kol hamit yaher, okay, one who acts haughtily. Im chachamhu, chachmato mistaleket mimeno. If he's a sage, his wisdom will leave him. Im navi, if he's a prophet, who, right, nivuato mistaleket mimeno, then his ability to prophesy, excuse me, leaves him. So following, explaining, im chachamhu chachmato mistaleket mimeno, if he is a sage, his wisdom leaves him. May Hillel, from this same Hillel that we just had the Breita. Da'amar Mar. Why? Because as the master, as the text of the Gemara told us, he chil mikantaran b'devarim. He began to rebuke them with words. V'ka'amar laho. And he said to them, Halacha zo shamati v'shachachti, that I learned this law and I forgot it. Okay? That's the back connection. Continuing the digression. Im navihu nevuato mistaleket mimenu. Okay? If he's a prophet, his prophecy leaves him. Midvora, as with the example of Devora. Dichtiv, because it's written, Chadlu prazon b'Yisrael, chadelu ad shekamti dvora, shekamti aim b'Yisrael. Okay, pasuk talking about the greatness of her becoming a important mother, so to speak, in Israel. V'gomer, and further, uktiv, and then it reads elsewhere, Uri dvora, Uri dabri shir, v'gomer. Wake up, Devora, wake up and tell us a shir, a song. But the song here implies tell us prophecy. So if it says you have to later tell us to give us prophecy, it means she must have lost it at some point. Now, Reish Lakish Amar says the following: Kol Adam shekoes. Okay, it's not just the negative characteristic of haughtiness that the rabbis disdain, but also one who is quick to anger. Whenever one quickly gets angry, says Reish Lakish, Im chachamhu, chachmato mistaleket mimeno. If he's a sage, okay, his wisdom departs from him. Im navihu, if he's a prophet, nivuato mistaleket mimeno. His prophecy leaves him. Im chachamhu, if he's a sage, right? Chachmato mistaleket mimeno. His wisdom leaves him. What's the example? Moshe, from Moshe Rabbeinu. Dichtiv. Why? Because we have a pasuk that specifically, sorry, okay, specifically says, Vayiksof Moshe al pikudei hachayil, that Moshe got angry, right? Ukti vayomer, and then it says afterwards, Vayomer Eliezer hakohen el anshe hatzava habaim lemilchama zot chukat haTorah asher tziva Hashem et Moshe v'gomer. That Eliezer has to teach a law, okay, supposedly said by Moshe. Miklau, okay, this comes to teach us what? De Moshe i'alem minei, that this particular law became hidden, forgotten, okay, so to speak, from him.
Because he became angry.
Right? Right. If somebody else had to say it,
Yeah, obviously he didn't do it.
Im navihu, if he's a prophet, nivlato mistaleket mimeno, his prophecy again leaves him. Elisha, from Elisha. Why? Dichtiv, because here again we find the following. Pasuk, Lulei pnei Yehoshaphat melech Yehuda, ani nosei im abit eleich ve'im erech. Regarding Yehoshaphat, the king, right, the following. V'gomer, and then further another pasuk, Va'ata kechuli menagen, Va'aya kenagen hemenagen, Va'tehi halav yad Hashem v'gomer. Okay. In other words, later Elisha needed some sort of, let's say, musical accompaniment in order to regain his ability to prophesy. That's what they're saying. Okay? Amar Rabbi Mani Bar Patish. He says as follows: Kol shekoes, anyone who gets angry, afilu poskin alav gedola min hashamayim, even if it was declared that something great should occur about that person in heaven. Okay? Moridin oto, he's reduced. In other words, he's lowered. Minalam, how do we know this? Me Eliav, from another individual. Okay? Shneamar v'yecher af Eliav bedor vayomer lama ze yeradata va'amina tashta ma'at hatzon hahena b'midbar ani yadati et zdoncha ve'et roa levavcha ki lema'an ra'ot milchama yeradata. Okay? Again, Eliav was going to be considered powerful military person, but eventually was reduced. V'chi azal Shmuel lememshichinhu, and when Shmuel went and was told, right in first book of Samuel, to anoint the son of Eli to be a king, right? The kuhu, in regards to all of them, ktiv, it was written, lo bazeh bachar Hashem. Each one that Shmuel went to, of I think it was 7 sons, Hashem told them, not this one, not this one, not this one, right? And Eliav was the tallest, the handsomest, things like that. Uba Eliav kativ, vayomer Hashem el Shmuel, that Hashem told Shmuel, al tabit al mar'ehu, va'al gova komato, ki ma'astihu. Don't look at his appearance or at his height, okay? Because I have rejected him. Miklau, dahava rachim le ad ha'idna, which implied that Hashem had favored, loved him up to that point, but then for some whatever reason, he rejected him. So the Gemara now comes back to our original discussion. Okay? Ishkachan tamid upesach didachu Shabbat. Right? So we have found already that the offering of the tamid, the offering of the korban pesach, these defer Shabbat. Right? Didachu tum'ah, that in regards to the entire question of Tumah, Minalan, how do we know that when Korban Pesach is a situation when everyone is defiled, that it's still offered bismano, okay, at its appropriate time? Amre, we say, ki hechi dialif Pesach mitamid le'inyan Shabbat, where we learn regarding the offering of Pesach from the Tamid regards to Shabbat. Hachanami yalif tamid mi Pesach le'inyan Tumah. Here too, is it possible that we can learn regarding the Korban Tamid, okay, from the example of Korban Pesach in regards to the status of Tumah, Upesach gufei minalan. But regarding the Korban Pesach itself,
How do we
how do
know?
we know this? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, says Rabbi Yochanan da Amar Kra, that we have a pasuk, Ish kiyeh tameh lenefesh. Okay? An individual who becomes tameh, namely, what does that tell us? Ish nidche lepesach sheni, an individual, okay, who becomes tameh, their korban pesach is put off to Pesach Sheni. Ve'ein tzibur nidchin lepesach sheni. But when the entire community is tamei,
Right?
we don't put off the korban pesach to pesach sheni. Ela avdei betuma, but rather we carry out the avoda, we carry
Even
out
the
the
Talmud.
worship, even then in that status of tumah. Now, Amar le Reish B'Shimon ben Lakish the Rabbi Yochanan. Ema, okay, I would say, Ish nidche lepesach sheni, tzibur lid lahota kanta. I might say, based on your drasha, he says, that an individual in a status of tuma has their korban pesach put off to pesach sheni. However, the community has no remedy. Lo b'Pesach Rishon, v'lo b'Pesach Sheni. Neither on normal Pesach nor on Pesach Sheni. Ela Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, but rather Reish Lakish himself says, Mehacha, we should learn it from here, namely at Pasuk, Vayishlachu min hamachaneh, kol tsarua, v'kol zav, v'chol tamei lenefesh, that one should send out, says the pasuk, from the camp anyone who is lame or who is zav or who is tamei. Yomar tme'ei metim, and here we'll say it refers to somebody who became tamei from corpse
Of
contact.
course.
Va'al yomar zavin u'mitzura'im. And we don't say it applies to the zav or to the Matzorah. Va'ani omer, and I say, im tme'ei metim mishtalchin. If they are tamei from corpse contact, they are sent out. Zavin Mitzoraim lo kol shekin. And if they're tamei as a zav or a Mitzorah, how much more so? Okay, now we'll just go over a tiny bit. Ela yesh lecha sha'ah shezavin u'mitzoraim mishtalchin. But you have a time when the zav and the mitzorah are sent out. Ve'ein tme'ei metim mishtalchin. But those who are tamei due to corpse tuma are not sent out. Ve'eza ze pesach haba betum'ah. That is Pesach when the community is tamei.
Amen.
Okay, and that's where we'll stop for today. Right? And we'll pick up tomorrow then. Okay, with Abaye making a comment, and of course others as well. Right? So everybody, Zev did not get on. We'll have to.
Yeah, he was on.
Yeah, he was on.
He was, and then he left.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right.
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, I don't see
you.
Owen again this morning. All right. Hope everything's okay. All right. Take care.
Take care.